Listen carefully. This story survived because someone failed to burn a book. If it had vanished, no one would ever question what power is willing to do when bloodlines matter more than souls. In the early hours before dawn, on land that still smells faintly of tobacco and iron, 6 boys were born within 14 months of each other. Not cousins, not brothers, something more deliberate. Their eyes carried the same unnatural amber hue. Their shoulders bore the same crescent-shaped mark, like a brand pressed by fate itself. These births were never announced in church, never entered into county records. They were written by hand, in ink meant to disappear, in a private ledger locked away like a confession no priest would hear. You are not supposed to know this story because it reveals a truth men are trained not to see. That history is not driven by accident or morality, but by calculation. And when institutions feel threatened, they do not hesitate to become architects of human lives. The estate was called Ravenswood. On the surface, it was order incarnate. White columns, Sunday hymns, manners sharpened like blades. But beneath that facade lived a widow who understood something most men never do, that control is strongest when it disguises itself as necessity. Helena Ravenswood did not mourn her husband the way society expected. She studied what he left behind. Ledgers, breeding records, notes about livestock, strength, temperament, yield. He believed blood could be optimized, refined, directed. And when he died without a male heir, Helena inherited more than land. She inherited a problem that law, custom, and morality refused to solve for her. Power was slipping. Property was vulnerable. Her daughters were liabilities in a system that worshipped male continuity. And so Helena did what institutions always do when survival is at stake. She stopped thinking in terms of people and started thinking in terms of systems. Somewhere between the horse breeding charts and the inventory of human property, an idea took shape. Cold, efficient, unforgivable. She would not wait for a suitable man to arrive. She would create one. Or more precisely, she would extract what she needed from a man the system already claimed to own. This is not a story about desire. It is a story about domination disguised as vision. About how intelligence without conscience becomes predatory. About how the language of improvement has always been used to justify the unthinkable. As you descend into this account, understand this. What happened at Ravenswood was not an anomaly. It was a prototype. And once you see the pattern, you will start to recognize it everywhere. Helena's solution required a vessel, not a husband, not a partner, a resource. And she already knew where to find him. Isaac Drummond existed in the records as Item 47. No surname in the legal sense. No lineage that mattered to the law. Yet everyone on the plantation felt his gravity. He stood taller than the others, moved slower, spoke less, and when he did, people listened. Strength restrained by discipline is always mistaken for leadership, and Helena noticed this long before she named it useful. He was a blacksmith, which meant the plantation quite literally bent to his hands. Tools, hinges, horseshoes, every mechanism of order passed through his forge. Isaac fixed what broke. He stabilized what failed. And in a decaying system, that kind of man becomes indispensable. Helena did not see him as a person. She saw him as convergence. Genetics, temperament, endurance, intelligence. Traits the estate needed to survive the next generation. Edmund had selected horses the same way. Helena simply removed sentiment from the equation. But there was another reason Isaac mattered. He could read. That detail alone was dangerous. Literacy meant interior life. Interior life meant resistance. And resistance, if guided correctly, could be redirected into compliance. Helena understood leverage. She knew freedom was the most powerful currency in a world designed to deny it. She ordered examinations under the guise of concern. She gathered reports from overseers who did not realize they were testifying. She watched Isaac interact with others, noting restraint, control, and something rarer, self-mastery. The kind that forms when a man has already lost everything and learned to survive without asking permission. This is how power evaluates you. Quietly, indirectly, without your consent. What Helena proposed was not an act of impulse. It was a design. A human system built on asymmetry where one side believes it is choosing, while the other has already decided the outcome. Isaac would be offered something so profound it would feel like agency. Manumission. Land. A future for his blood. The brilliance of the trap was that it required no chains. Only hope. This is where men misunderstand history. They imagine domination as force. But the most effective control systems use incentives. They transform survival instincts into obedience. They make participation feel voluntary. By the time Helena summoned Isaac to the study, the decision had already been made by someone else by the structure itself. He was never meant to say no. The system had engineered a yes long before the offer was spoken. And once he accepted, Ravenswood crossed a threshold it could never return from. The daughters were the final variable. 6 lives raised to obey decorum, suddenly asked to become instruments of a vision they did not create. Helena did not command them. She educated them. She framed the plan as inevitability. Property law, male succession, the slow erosion of their status if nothing was done. She spoke like a general addressing officers before a siege. Calm, rational, relentless. Each daughter reacted differently, and that is important. Compliance is never uniform. It is negotiated internally, rationalized differently by each mind. The eldest understood duty. The middle ones understood fear. The youngest understood there was no exit that did not involve loss. Helena never threatened them. She didn't have to. The world already had. She simply translated that threat into a choice between ruin and participation. This is how institutions recruit. They present atrocity as pragmatism. The daughters were not villains. They were assets caught inside a machine that did not care about their consent any more than it cared about Isaac's. Gender, class, race, these were not moral categories. They were levers. A secluded cottage was built. Separate well, separate path, invisible from the road. Privacy masquerading as propriety. Each daughter would stay there briefly, return to society altered, and speak of nothing. Silence became the family's most valuable inheritance. Time was controlled. Movement was scheduled. Even scandal was managed. Helena understood that proximity creates suspicion, so she spaced the pregnancies just enough to dull attention, but close enough to maintain genetic consistency. Precision like this does not come from madness. It comes from belief. What belief? That blood determines destiny. That superior outcomes justify immoral means. That future generations matter more than present suffering. These are the same beliefs that fueled empires. Eugenics, colonization, institutional religion when it strayed into governance. The same logic repeats because it works. Isaac's role was reduced to function. The daughters' roles were reduced to vessels. And Helena became something older than a widow. She became a curator of lineage. By the time the first child was born, the system had stabilized. Everyone knew their role. Everyone understood the cost of disruption. This is the most dangerous phase of any control structure when atrocity becomes routine. And once routine sets in, conscience is no longer consulted. Here is where the story becomes uncomfortable for modern ears. Because what happened next forces you to confront a truth about power most men instinctively avoid. The children were not hidden. They were repurposed. They were raised together, educated together, disciplined together. Helena ensured they shared tutors, schedules, values. Individual identity was discouraged. Collective identity was engineered. This is not family. This is conditioning. The boys were taught they were special without being told why. Excellence was expected, not praised. Weakness was corrected, not comforted. They learned early that belonging required performance. And Isaac? His freedom was delayed. Always one document away. Always one final condition. This is how leverage sustains itself by remaining just out of reach. Helena's genius was not cruelty. It was system design. She created incentives that aligned everyone's survival with her vision. Resistance became self-sabotage. Silence became safety. Halfway through this descent, You need to make a decision. If you're still listening, if you feel the weight of this story pressing against something inside you, type this phrase in the comments twice. Blood remembers. Blood remembers. Not as superstition, as recognition. Because what Ravenswood reveals is not just a historical horror. It is a pattern. Institution breeding outcome. Families sacrificing ethics for continuity. Systems rewarding compliance while claiming virtue. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. The story stops being about a widow in Virginia and starts being about how power trains people to betray themselves willingly. The final births completed the design. 6 sons, 1 source, many beneficiaries, and a legacy that would vanish from official records while continuing quietly through inheritance, influence, and silence. Dangerous knowledge is not loud. It is subtle. It whispers from ledgers no one was meant to read, and it waits for men capable of seeing it clearly. The official records end where accountability would have begun. Fires, renovations, lost documents, convenient erasures. History cleans itself this way when the truth threatens too many living descendants. But fragments survived. Physician notes, property inventories, marginalia written by hands that hesitated. Enough to confirm that Ravenswood was not rumor. It was rehearsal. After the war, the estate fractured. Names changed. Assets redistributed. The sons dispersed into society with educations, connections, and a shared origin they were never meant to acknowledge. This is how illegitimate power launders itself into legitimacy through time. No trials were held. No reckoning occurred. Because systems do not prosecute themselves. They outlast witnesses and rename crimes as necessity. And this is the final revelation you must carry with you. The past is not dead. It is operational. The same logic that guided Helena Ravenswood still governs boardrooms, laboratories, and political institutions today. Optimization, selection, narrative control. The language has softened, but the intent has not changed. Men who understand this stop seeking permission. They stop mistaking morality for protection. They learn to read systems the way Helena read ledgers, not to imitate her, but to avoid becoming inventory in someone else's design. This story is dangerous not because it is grotesque, but because it is effective. It worked, and anything that works will be repeated until it is exposed. You are not meant to hear this as entertainment. You are meant to hear it as a warning. The deeper you go, the clearer the pattern becomes. And once it becomes clear, the descent is no longer optional. It is initiated. After Helena's death, Ravenswood did not collapse. That is the detail historians avoid, because collapse would imply justice. What followed instead was absorption. The estate was divided, sold, merged, and renamed. The main house lost its name first, then its records, then its memory. What remained were men who carried themselves differently, who moved through institutions with unspoken confidence, who seemed to understand systems intuitively, as if they had been trained for them before they were old enough to know they were being trained at all. The 6 sons never appeared together in public as adults. That was intentional. Concentration draws scrutiny. Dispersion creates influence. 1 entered law, 1 commerce, 1 the military, 1 the clergy, 1 medicine, 1 land management. Not coincidence. Coverage. This is how power hedges itself. Redundancy. Reach. Silence. They were bound not by affection, but by something colder, shared origin and shared risk. None of them could expose the truth without destroying himself. This is how blackmail evolves in a culture. You don't need threats when everyone understands the cost of speech. Isaac Drummond vanished from the records shortly after the final birth. Some accounts suggest he was freed quietly. Others imply he was relocated north with money and instructions never to return. A few darker fragments suggest he never left the land at all, buried under a name no one would question. History offers no resolution because resolution would require confession. And Helena? She died respected. Church bells rang. Eulogies praised her strength, her discipline, her devotion to family. This is how narrative completes the ritual. The story ends cleanly, so the system can continue unchallenged. But systems leave residue. Patterns repeat. The same logic reappears wherever legacy matters more than humanity. Whenever someone says the ends justify the means. Whenever selection replaces dignity. Whenever people are reduced to inputs and outputs. If this story unsettles you, it should. Because it is not alien. It is familiar. It is embedded in how institutions still operate, only now the ledgers are digital, the cottages are contracts, and the promises of freedom are dressed up as opportunity. Ravenswood was not a scandal. It was a blueprint. And once you recognize a blueprint, you begin to see how often it has been used. Here is the part no one teaches you. Awareness alone is not enough. The system counts on passive understanding. It tolerates private outrage. What it fears is pattern recognition paired with self-mastery. Helena's greatest advantage was not cruelty. It was comprehension. She understood incentives. She understood timing. She understood that people can be guided to betray themselves if you align their survival with your outcome. Most men live inside systems without ever studying them. They confuse rules with reality. They mistake permission for safety. And so they're shocked when they realize too late that they have been optimized for someone else's agenda. Ravenswood is not about race alone, or gender alone, or class alone. Those are variables, not causes. The cause is hierarchy justified by narrative. The belief that some are entitled to design the futures of others. Every empire uses this belief. Every institution that grows large enough eventually adopts it. And every man who refuses to see it becomes raw material. This is why the story feels heavy. It is not accusing you. It is challenging you to stop romanticizing power and start dissecting it. To stop consuming history as tragedy and start reading it as instruction, both cautionary and tactical. Ask yourself who benefits from your obedience, from your silence, from your confusion. Ask what incentives are shaping your choices without your consent. Ask what ledger you are written in without knowing it exists. The men who inherited Ravenswood's influence did not succeed because they were monstrous. They succeeded because they were prepared, groomed, conditioned. And that should terrify you more than any act of overt violence. Because preparation is invisible. Conditioning feels like culture. And by the time you notice it, the outcome has already been decided. This is the moment where most listeners retreat, where discomfort becomes dismissal, where the mind seeks relief by calling the story extreme or irrelevant. Do not do that. That reflex is the final layer of control. This is where the descent ends and the responsibility begins. You now understand something most men never confront, that power does not announce itself with malice. It arrives as order, as protection, as legacy. It tells you the cost is necessary and the outcome will justify everything that came before. Helena Ravenswood believed she was preserving her family. The institution believed it was maintaining stability. The sons believed they were exceptional by merit. Each belief was partially true, and together, they formed a lie strong enough to last generations. This is how dangerous knowledge works. It does not demand belief. It demands discernment. You are not meant to imitate this story. You are meant to immunize yourself against it. To recognize when you are being evaluated instead of respected. When incentives are replacing ethics. When silence is being rewarded more than truth. Men obsessed with secrets often chase the wrong ones. They look for symbols, conspiracies, hidden names. The real secret is structural. It is how systems shape behavior without force. How they turn survival into compliance and ambition into leash. Once you see that, your relationship to the world changes. You stop asking what you are allowed to do. You start asking who benefits if you don't. Ravenswood no longer exists as a place, but it exists as a pattern. In corporations, in governments, in families, in movements that claim moral superiority while quietly practicing selection. This knowledge will not make you comfortable. It will make you precise. And precision is what separates men who are ruled from men who cannot be easily ruled. You were never meant to hear this story as a spectator. You were meant to hear it as an initiation. A reminder that history is not over and a ledger is still being written. The only question is whether your name appears as an entry or as the man who learned to read it.